My name is Rhonda Vance, 28 years old. Even now, years later, I can still feel the echo of that moment, the quiet fracture that split my heart open on the day I was supposed to walk into forever. The day my father chose my sister over me. The day everything I'd believed about family cracked like glass beneath my feet. But this isn't just a story about a ruined wedding. It's the story of how that choice had been years in the making, buried under layers of love, grief, and the kind of silence that eats away at everything it touches. Back then, I used to believe we were the perfect family. We lived in a cozy two-story house just outside Philadelphia, the kind with a front porch swing and an old oak tree that turned fiery red every autumn. On weekends, Dad would rake the leaves into enormous piles, pretending to grumble while my sister Valeria and I dove into them, scattering the work he'd just done. Mom would watch from the kitchen window, laughing, her hands dusted with flour from baking. Dad was a financial advisor, tall, confident, with a calm voice that made even his clients feel like they could trust him with everything. In my eyes, he could fix any problem. Every morning before school, he'd sit across from me at the kitchen table, drinking black coffee and reading the paper while I ate cereal. "You've got that spark, Rhonda," he'd tell me, his smile warm and steady. "Don't ever lose it." Mom was the gentle balance to his steadiness. She worked part-time as a nurse, but at home, she was a storyteller, a baker, a listener. Her laughter could fill the whole room, softening Dad's sharp edges. Every rainy afternoon, she'd bake chocolate chip cookies and hum along to old jazz records. The scent of butter and vanilla meant safety. And then there was Valeria, 3 years older, a storm disguised as sunlight. She was the tall, athletic one, always out on the soccer field, adored by everyone. I was the quiet one with ink-stained fingers and sketchbooks full of daydreams. She teased me for being too soft, but back then it was sisterly, playful. At least I thought it was. The first change was small, so small I almost missed it. Mom started coming home from the hospital more tired than usual. She'd brush it off with a smile, saying, "Just long shifts, sweetheart." But soon she began napping more often, her skin turning pale under the kitchen lights. Dad hovered, worry deepening the lines around his eyes. One night I woke to the sound of voices through the wall. Dad's voice, low and tight. Mom's, trembling. I crept out to the hallway and saw the light under their door, the shadow of his hand gripping hers. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew something was wrong. A week later, the word cancer entered our lives like a thunderclap. Stage 4, pancreatic. I didn't understand it at 11, but I understood the way the house changed. The air got heavier, the laughter disappeared, the kitchen filled with the hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic. Mom's bed moved downstairs. Valeria took charge. She was 14 then, and she wore her new sense of control like armor. "Come on, Rhonda, help me make tea for Mom," she'd bark, as if giving orders would keep her from falling apart. I tried to cheer Mom up with hand-drawn cards, flowers, angels, anything bright. Mom would smile, thin, but sincere. "You always bring light into the room," she'd whisper, her fingers brushing my cheek. Dad, though, began to vanish in plain sight. He buried himself in work, staying late at the office, as if numbers and spreadsheets could drown out the sound of Mom's cough. He'd come home after midnight, loosen his tie, and sit by her bed in silence, his eyes red but dry. And Valeria, she became his soldier. She made sure dinner was ready, bills were paid, the house stayed clean. Everyone praised her maturity, even Dad. "You're a rock, Val," he'd say one night at dinner, patting her shoulder. She glowed under the praise, her eyes flicking to me like she'd just claimed a victory. That was the first time I saw it, that flicker of triumph. I didn't know what to call it then. I just felt it, the way a child feels the air change before a storm. Mom passed away 6 months later. It was raining, soft and steady, the kind of rain that sounded like whispering on the windows. I held her hand as her breathing slowed, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. She smiled one last time, and then the world went still. At the funeral, everything blurred. The scent of lilies, the rustle of black fabric, Dad's hand gripping Valeria's shoulder. People came up to me with kind words, but they sounded far away. Valeria stood beside Dad like his right hand, talking to relatives, taking charge. When I reached for his hand, he squeezed it absently and turned away to thank someone else. That night, I sat in my room surrounded by my sketchbooks, the silence pressing down like a weight. Valeria came in without knocking. "You need to stop crying," she said flatly. "Dad's got enough to deal with." Something inside me broke a little at that. "You think I don't know that?" I whispered, but she'd already turned to leave. After that, the house didn't feel like home anymore. Dad threw himself deeper into work. Valeria became the new center of his world, cooking, managing chores, making decisions. She liked being the responsible one, needed it. I was the quiet shadow in the corner, the reminder of the mother we'd lost. Years later, I'd realized that grief doesn't always bond people. Sometimes it makes them cling to control, to the person who makes their pain easier to manage. For Dad, that was Valeria. For me, it was my art. I started drawing late into the night, sketching Mom's face from memory until my pencils wore down to stubs. I filled page after page with oak leaves and kitchen windows and shadows that looked a little too much like Dad's silhouette. It was the only way I knew how to speak when no one was listening. Once I overheard Valeria on the phone with one of her friends. "He trusts me now," she said, her voice sharp with pride. "He actually asks me before making decisions. Rhonda just stays in her head, like always." She said it like a joke, but I heard the satisfaction underneath. She was carving out her territory, and I was disappearing quietly into the background. By the time I turned 13, Dad and Valeria had built a rhythm that didn't include me. Dinner conversations about school or soccer or work, laughter I couldn't join. I'd sit there pushing peas around my plate, invisible. One night, I caught Dad's reflection in the window, staring blankly at the empty chair where Mom used to sit. For the first time, I realized he wasn't looking at me at all. He was looking through me. And still, I tried. Every Father's Day, I'd make him a handmade card, hoping maybe it would remind him of me. He'd smile, thank me, then set it aside. Valeria would give him a sleek tie or a book about finance, and his eyes would light up. The gap kept widening, one small moment at a time. Looking back now, I can trace it all to those quiet years after Mom's death. The grief, the silence, the choices made out of pain rather than love. That was where the real betrayal began. Not at the wedding, not with the phone call, but here, in this house where love started turning into competition. And I didn't see it then, but every time Dad looked past me to praise Valeria, every time she smiled that knowing smile, they were rehearsing for the day he'd walk away from me completely. That day would come, and it would destroy everything. I used to tell myself that high school would be the reset button, that after the rawness of grief, the world would soften and return what it had taken. It didn't. What it did was rearrange loyalties. By then, Valeria had become the thermostat in our house. If she ran warm, the rooms brightened. If she ran cold, breath fogged in the air. Dad seemed grateful for the order she produced. Color-coded calendars on the fridge, meal prep in neat glass containers, receipts clipped to a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. I learned that if I wanted to be seen, I had to ask for it weeks in advance and in writing. The first time I noticed the sabotage, it was almost elegant. I had a band concert, a small thing in the echoing gym with folding chairs and a buzz of fluorescent lights. I had circled the date on the family calendar with a little star and wrote Dad's name beside it. The afternoon of the concert, I came home to find the star erased, the ink smudged like an old bruise. "It looked messy," Valeria said, rinsing an apple at the sink. "I rewrote it on the whiteboard for him." That night, I scanned the crowd for his face, lifting my chin each time the door squeaked open. He didn't come. Later, I found the whiteboard wiped clean. I tried not to make everything into a story about betrayal. People forget. Work runs late. But forgetting became a pattern, and the pattern became a narrative, and the narrative swallowed me whole. When the art department nominated me for a district award my junior year, I told Dad a dozen times. "It matters to me," I said, which felt like laying a fragile bird in his hands. He nodded, distracted. The night of the ceremony, my phone buzzed with a text. "Congrats, kiddo." Client dinner ran late. The words blurred as I stared at the metal plaque in my lap. From across the room, Valeria watched me, arms folded, mouth tilted in something not quite a smile. Later, in the hallway, she shrugged. "You're resilient, Rhonda. Not everyone needs cheering sections." I learned to stop asking. I learned to get good at leaving rooms quietly. In those years, I made a habit of walking circles around the block when I felt the house closing in, my breath making white ribbons in winter air. I would pass the lit windows of other families, shadows leaning close over board games, someone washing dishes while music played, and feel both jealous and relieved. If I couldn't have that, I could have solitude, which was a kind of dignity. College became a door I could swing open with both hands. I chose Pittsburgh partly because the city felt big enough to disappear inside and small enough to find my way out again. I left the house with 2 suitcases, a portfolio rolled like a secret blueprint, and the brittle hope that distance could be an antidote. Valeria hugged me at the curb like a politician for a photo. "Make us proud," she said to Dad, but her eyes were on me, measuring the space she'd just won. He patted my shoulder. "Call when you settle in." I did. He didn't answer. Freedom tasted like cold coffee and warm library air and rain on brick sidewalks. It tasted like anonymous busy streets where no one knew the shape of your grief. I met Hugo on a Tuesday when he asked to borrow my literature notes after the flu claimed his week. He returned them with marginalia and pencil, neat, considerate arrows, and a line that read, "I think you're right about the river being a character, not a setting." With him, things unfolded without stage directions. We fell into a rhythm. Study tables and vending machine dinners, jokes in elevators, the low hum of the city outside his dorm where we planned futures we couldn't yet afford. He had an engineer's brain and a poet's loyalty. He didn't fix my life. He just made room in it, and then he stood there with the patience of someone who'd planted trees and knew shade would come. Meeting his family was like stepping into a house where the floor remembered your name. Grace, his mother, smelled like lemon hand cream and clean laundry. She listened with her whole face. Tom told dry jokes that got funnier the longer you thought about them. And Uncle Mike, Hugo's uncle by marriage, retired English teacher with a silver halo of hair, carried a quiet gravity that made you feel steadied just by standing near him. He asked questions that were not traps. When he learned I drew, he brought me a stack of old art books from a teacher's sale and a fountain pen he said he no longer used because it made him sentimental. "Don't worry," he added, catching the hesitation in my thanks. "I have others. This one wants to be busy again." I went home and drew for hours, the line of ink like a vein of truth across the page. The more time I spent in their home, the more I noticed the absence of performance. If someone was late, the others ate and made them a plate. If there was an argument, there were apologies without ledger sheets. At first I felt like a thief, pocketing these small customs to bring back to my life like contraband. Then I allowed myself to belong. On holidays with them, I noticed the old ache in me shifting shape, less sharp-edged, more like a stone you carry because by now it has your fingerprints. Dad and I circled each other at a distance through those years. Calls that felt like leaving voicemails on a cold planet, texts that read like receipts. Valeria, meanwhile, thrived. Promotions, parties, posts that gathered hearts like harvests. Her captions always had the same cruel brightness. #family first. I tried to ignore the knot of anger those 2 words tied in my chest. When Hugo proposed, blue ring, glinting in candlelight, his voice steady, mine not, I let myself believe the story would shift. I imagined bringing Dad back into the frame, imagined the first page of a new chapter where he stood beside me. On the phone, he sounded briefly like the man from the kitchen table of my childhood. "Of course I'll walk you," he said, and I pressed the phone to my cheek after we hung up, like you might do with a warm cup on a winter sidewalk. We set the date, June 15th, and the planning weeks were a collage. Silk swatches, spreadsheets, midnight laughter over failed cake tastings. I mailed the invitations and waited for the quiet to become less frightening. Then Valeria called, voice lacquered with apology that didn't touch her eyes. "I just realized," she said, "my firm is sponsoring my promotion gala that morning. It's a lot. Dad's going to host some of our clients. I'm sure he can do both." He couldn't. The venues were hours apart. I wanted to believe coincidence, but her timing had the precision of a trap. For days I bargained. Schedules, carpools, helicopters if we had to. I even laughed at that because hope makes you absurd. When Dad hesitated, I offered solutions like a lawyer pleading my own case. "I need you," I said, and hated how small it sounded. He cleared his throat. "This means a lot to her." I hung up and sat in the dark until my eyes adjusted and the outlines of furniture became proof that I still occupied a world. It unraveled quickly after that. Hugo held me, while I burned through anger into a quieter despair that felt older than both of us. Postpone, he urged, or skip the aisle entirely. We'll make our own tradition. I shook my head because I could hear Valeria's satisfied breath even in the silence. I didn't want to give her my date, too. Grace invited me to lunch and told me a story I hadn't asked for about her first marriage, the ways her own father turned love into a list of requirements, and how it took years for her to forgive the ledger for existing. Sometimes, she said, the person who shows up is the one who gets the honor. That night I lay awake with our ceiling fan erasing the room in a soft blur and thought about Uncle Mike standing in school auditoriums, cheering for sons he didn't have, building, plank by plank, a bridge to the people who wanted to cross. I called him 2 days later and asked to meet at the bookstore cafe where the light falls kind in late afternoon. He arrived early with a vanilla latte, my order, remembered, and a second napkin because he said I always needed more napkins. We talked about unimportant things for a while because grief has to be distracted before it coughs up the truth. Finally I asked, "Would you walk me?" The question shivered between us. His eyes went bright in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. "I would be honored, Rhonda." He didn't ask for conditions. He didn't promise to replace anyone. He simply offered presence. The next morning, Dad called. I answered because hope is stubborn. He explained logistics as if I were an intern he needed to disappoint professionally. When he said, "You'll find someone," I heard the click of a door. I hadn't realized I still held open. After we hung up, I stared at his contact name, at the little blue bubble trail of our almost conversations, at the empty space where a father might say, "Forgive me." I pressed my finger to the screen and deleted the thread. The phone asked, "Are you sure?" I answered the only way I could. Outside, the city exhaled the heat of early summer. I stood by the window and watched people move along the sidewalk with the comfort of those who expected the day to keep its promises. In the glass, my reflection looked like a woman choosing her own weather. Somewhere in another part of town, Valeria was probably practicing her speech for a gala that had become inevitable by being said out loud. Somewhere my father believed he could be in 2 places at once and still be called faithful. I closed the curtains and let the room go dark, then sat on the floor and pulled my wedding shoes from their box. I held one in each hand like balancing scales, weighing what could still be salvaged. Behind my ribs, something small and determined began to stand up. I didn't know it yet, but a stranger would take my arm at the back of an aisle and, in doing so, stop being a stranger at all. Sometimes the person who walks you forward also walks you home. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in sunlight that felt borrowed, too delicate for a day built on absence. I woke before the alarm, the apartment still and blue. Hugo's steady breathing from the next room anchored me, but beneath it, my pulse beat fast, unsteady, like a clock with 2 different times running at once. Grace arrived early with coffee and the calm of someone who'd weathered storms before. She kissed my forehead and smoothed my hair. "You don't have to be brave," she said. "Just be here." I nodded, even though bravery was the only thing keeping me upright. The suite at the venue buzzed with quiet movement. Bridesmaids pinning curls, the photographer testing light, soft piano floating through the air like a memory. I caught my reflection in the mirror. Pale shoulders, lace gown, eyes rimmed with that sleepless shimmer of someone standing between hope and hurt. Then came the knock. Slow, polite. I opened the door to Uncle Mike. He stood there holding a small box, his suit pressed but his expression shy, as if he weren't sure whether he belonged in this moment. "Your mom's bracelet," he said softly. "Grace thought you might want to wear it." Inside the box lay silver links with a single charm, a tiny paintbrush. My throat closed. "Thank you," I whispered. He looked at me the way only someone who's also been left behind can look. "You ready?" I hesitated. "As I'll ever be." We took our places at the entrance of the garden terrace. The air smelled like jasmine and new beginnings. Beyond the archway, guests shifted in their chairs, soft murmurs rising and falling like a tide. Somewhere in that crowd was an empty seat that once belonged to my father. "Whenever you're ready," Uncle Mike said, offering his arm. I took it. And as we stepped forward, the music swelled. The world sharpened into details, the sunlight flickering through leaves, the white of the aisle fabric, the way Hugo's face lifted, astonished, joyful, steady. Each step felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost. When we reached him, Uncle Mike placed my hand in Hugo's and whispered, "Walk toward peace, not approval." The ceremony unfolded in a blur of vows and trembling voices. When Hugo said, "I choose you," every single day, something deep in me cracked open, not from pain, but from release. For the first time in years, I felt entirely seen. Applause rose as we kissed. Camera flashes sparkled like tiny stars. Grace was crying openly. Uncle Mike stood with his head bowed, smiling in that quiet way of his. For a moment, everything was right. And then, familiar cologne. I turned. My father stood at the back of the terrace, suit wrinkled, tie askew, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. For half a heartbeat, the child in me lit up. Then the truth rushed in behind it. He had chosen her first. He was only here for what was left. He approached awkwardly during the reception, clutching a small gift bag like a peace offering. "Sorry I missed the walk," he said, forcing a smile. "Valeria's event ran late. You know how these things go." I did. I also knew the event had been designed to make him late. I smiled politely. "This is Uncle Mike," I said, gesturing beside me. "He walked me." My father's smile froze. "A stranger?" Before I could answer, my cousin Thomas, Valeria's coworker, appeared, face pale, voice shaking. "Rhonda, I need to tell you something." He turned to my father. "There was no promotion gala. It was just a party. She made the whole thing up." My father blinked. "What are you talking about?" "She told everyone you insisted on hosting clients," Thomas said, his eyes darting between us. "I saw the text, sir. She lied so you'd miss the wedding." For a moment, everything stilled. The music, the chatter, the clink of glasses. My father's hand trembled, his fingers tightening around the gift bag until the paper crumpled. He stepped back, shaking his head as if denying gravity itself. She said Rhonda didn't want me to come," he murmured. Uncle Mike's voice was calm but firm. "Maybe it's time you stop letting her speak for other people." My father's mouth opened, then closed. Around us, laughter from another table floated across the garden, a cruel reminder that the world kept moving. He pulled out his phone, scrolled, then froze, reading the proof Thomas had shown him. "Excuse me," he whispered, and walked away. He called Valeria right there, voice low but edged with disbelief. I watched him pacing near the rose bushes, the phone pressed tight to his ear, his jaw tightening as the truth unraveled. Then silence. He ended the call and came back, face pale, eyes hollow. "She admitted it," he said quietly. "All of it. The lies, the calls, the messages." I waited for the anger to come, but instead there was only the slow ache of something long overdue. "I told you once that you'd lose me," I said softly. "You already had." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I know." We stood there for a long time, two people caught between endings. Then Uncle Mike placed a hand on my father's shoulder. "You can't fix the past," he said, "but you can stop repeating it." My father nodded again, slower this time, and stepped back. "Congratulations, Rhonda," he said, voice breaking. "He's a good man." When he left, I didn't watch him go. I turned to Hugo, who wrapped an arm around me. "You okay?" "I think so," I said, and it was the truth. That night, under strings of warm light, we danced until the stars blurred. The pain didn't vanish. It just learned to move differently. When Uncle Mike gave his toast, his words fell like balm. Family isn't always given. Sometimes it's chosen. Sometimes it's the people who stand up when others sit down. The guests cheered. Grace wiped tears. Even Hugo's usually stoic father clapped hard enough to make the glasses ring. Weeks later, on our honeymoon in Greece, the days folded into sunlight and sea spray. I let the salt wind carry away the last remnants of shame. Hugo would find me sketching on the balcony, temples, waves, strangers' faces, and say, "You look lighter." I was. When we returned home, the voicemail light blinked. My father's voice filled the apartment, rough, remorseful, full of pauses. "I was blind, Rhonda. I let her turn my guilt into a leash. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to earn it." It took me weeks to reply. When I finally did, it wasn't with words. I invited him to Sunday dinner at Grace's house. He showed up early, flowers trembling in his hands. Uncle Mike greeted him at the door, the two men exchanging a quiet nod, the kind that carries both apology and acceptance. Dinner was simple. Roast chicken, laughter that came hesitantly at first, then freely. When I looked around the table, I saw a mosaic of what family had become. Hugo's hand covering mine, Grace refilling plates, Uncle Mike telling an old story, my father listening instead of explaining. Thanksgiving came with new traditions, shared recipes, shared peace. Valeria didn't come. Her absence was its own kind of truth, the silence she'd built finally turning on her. Later that night, as the dishes dried and the laughter faded, I sat by the window sketching. The page filled with faces. Grace, Hugo, Uncle Mike, Dad. None perfect, all unfinished, just like us. Sometimes I think about that day in the garden, about the version of me who waited for an apology that never came soon enough. I want to tell her this. Forgiveness isn't surrender. It's the quiet decision to stop carrying what was never yours to bear. Because in the end, love is not about who walked away first. It's about who stayed, who showed up, who kept choosing you when no one else did. And for the first time, that was enough.